News now. When the police finally opened the church basement, they expected to find stolen artifacts. What they found instead were bodies, 6 of them. And the man who'd been delivering Sunday sermons for 22 years was now the prime suspect in one of New York City's darkest murder sprees. The night was thick with rain when the screams cut to the silence of the Lower East Side. People in the neighborhood later swore they could hear them echoing down the narrow brick alleys. But no one stepped outside. Not in this city. Not anymore. A man in a dark cassock stood under a streetlight, his face hidden, the wet fabric clinging to his body as if the shadows themselves were holding him still. Moments later, the light flickered and he was gone. It was the summer of 1993 when the city's headlines exploded with the name Father Charles Murray. New York City, a place already hardened by crime, was now obsessed with the story of a priest accused of being a serial killer. The NYPD claimed to have evidence, disturbing trophies hidden in a locked drawer inside the rectory. 6 victims, each found with a rosary wrapped tightly in their hands. A suspect who stood at the pulpit on Sundays and delivered sermons about grace, salvation, and sin. Before the headlines, Charles was a different man, born and raised in Brooklyn. He was known as a compassionate figure, a shepherd to the lost. His parish loved him, especially the elderly and the poor. He hosted food drives, counseled troubled teens, and never seemed too busy to listen. His voice was calm, his presence steady. People said he could make you feel safe just by speaking to you. But there were others who whispered he was too private, too guarded. Some parishioners claimed they had seen him wandering the streets at night, his cassock swaying in the wind, his eyes fixed on something far away. The weeks leading up to the first murder were uneventful, at least on the surface. Charles continued his routine, holding mass, visiting the sick, and meeting with community leaders. But neighbors recalled strange occurrences. A door to the rectory left ajar in the middle of the night. A muffled argument in the empty church. A car parked near the building for hours. Engine running, driver unseen. The first body was found behind a deli 2 blocks from the church. A young woman, hands clasped around a rosary. There was no sign of struggle. No one heard a thing. Police found nothing at the scene except for faint footprints leading toward the rectory. Weeks later, a second victim appeared. Same cause of death, same eerie positioning. By the third murder, the press had connected the dots. The city called him the preacher butcher. Detectives raided the rectory. In a locked drawer, they found personal belongings of each victim. Scarves, jewelry, a blood-stained handkerchief. Charles denied everything. He said the drawer was private and locked for years. But his fingerprints were everywhere. The police arrested him on the spot. The image of him in handcuffs, led past the altar, burned into the city's memory. As the case unfolded, the public was divided. Half believed he was guilty, a monster hiding behind the collar. The other half thought it was impossible, that someone was trying to destroy a good man's life. The evidence was damning, but there was no clear motive. In the final days before trial, Charles sat in his cell, calm and unreadable. Reporters shouted questions, but he never answered, just that same faint smile. And then came the court date, the city ready to watch its most shocking trial in years. But what no one knew was that the defense was about to tear the story apart. And when they did, the truth, or something like it, would change everything. The trial opened with the city watching every movement, every word. Father Charles sat quietly beside his lawyer, a sharp and calculated man named Vincent Dwyer. The prosecution laid out their case. Photographs of the victims, the locked drawer with the personal items, the fingerprints. The jury's eyes were fixed on the priest, but he never looked away from them. Then Vincent stood. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made the room fall silent. He told the jury that the drawer in question had been installed decades before Charles even became the church's priest. That drawer, Vincent claimed, had been accessible to at least 6 other people over the years. He brought in a locksmith who confirmed the lock had been tampered with recently, just weeks before the police raid. Next, Vincent produced security footage from a building across the street. The grainy video showed a figure in dark clothing entering the rectory late at night, on the eve of the third murder. The figure was shorter than Charles, moved differently, and left carrying a small box. The timestamp matched the night police believed the items were hidden. A former church volunteer took the stand and admitted she'd once found a man she didn't recognize wandering inside the church after hours. She told the jury she reported it to another staff member, but nothing was ever done. Her voice trembled as she glanced at Charles, insisting she didn't believe he was capable of such violence. Piece by piece, Vincent dismantled the image of the preacher-butcher. The jury began to shift in their seats. Even the public outside the courthouse seemed unsure now. Could the police have gotten it wrong? Could someone else have planted the evidence to frame him? By the end of the second week, doubt had seeped into the prosecution's case. Vincent's final blow came when he revealed that DNA found on rosary beads the second victim didn't match Charles. It matched an unidentified male still at large. The courtroom buzzed. The press swarmed outside, ready to declare a possible collapse of case. Charles sat quietly, hands folded, eyes closed as if in prayer. Vincent's closing words echoed through the courtroom. If you can't trust the evidence, you can't trust the accusation. But just when it seemed like the tide was turning in the priest's favor, a phone call came into the lead detective's office. A jogger had stumbled upon a body in a vacant lot just 3 blocks from the church. The victim's hands were clasped tightly around a rosary, and the evidence led straight back to the rectory. The scream of police sirens ripped through the still morning air as yellow tape went up around the vacant lot. Reporters were already gathering before the body was even moved. The victim was a young woman, late 20s, pale from cold, her fingers locked around a silver rosary as if she'd been praying in her final moments. Detective Marlowe's face was tight as he looked at the evidence bag. The beads weren't just any rosary. They were identical to the ones gifted by St. Augustine's Church to its parishioners on Easter. Within hours, police were inside the rectory again, combing through drawers, closets, and hidden compartments. The media swarmed outside the gates, their cameras flashing as Charles was escorted into an unmarked car for additional questioning. Vincent Dwyer followed close behind, his jaw clenched, not saying a word. In the interrogation room, detectives pushed photos across the table. The rosary, the victim's face, soil samples from the scene that matched the church garden. Explain this, they demanded. Charles only shook his head, saying he had never seen the woman before. His voice was low, steady, but the beads of sweat on his forehead betrayed the weight pressing down on him. The city, which just days earlier had started to question the priest's guilt, now turned again. Headlines screamed, "Priest's church linked to new killing." Social media exploded with outrage. The parish's doors were shut, the pews empty, candles left unlit. But Vincent wasn't finished. He pulled late nights, poring over church records, volunteer schedules, and visitor logs. He combed through old security footage until his eyes burned. Something didn't sit right. The victim wasn't on any parish list. She hadn't attended Mass. She had no connection to Charles, but someone else in the church might have known her. Then, in the grainy footage from the night before her death, Vincent spotted a familiar figure leaving the church, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat. The timestamp placed him there at the exact time Charles would confirm to be at a hospital visiting an elderly member of the congregation. Vincent froze the frame. The man's face turned toward the camera just enough to reveal his identity. It was the church deacon, and everyone knew the deacon hated the new priest. The knock on the deacon's door came just after midnight. It wasn't a friendly visit. 2 detectives stepped in, their flashlights cutting through the stale air. Stacks of unopened letters, empty whiskey bottles, and an unlit fireplace set the scene. The deacon, still in his undershirt, froze when they placed a photo of the murdered woman on the table. His eyes darted, not to the photo, but to the half-burned envelope in the hearth. At the station, Vincent sat across from the deacon, his voice calm but deliberate. "You've been working at St. Augustine's for 15 years. Why did you tell parish members Father Charles was dangerous?" The deacon's lip curled. "Because he is." But his gaze faltered when Vincent slid over a series of bank records. Transactions, withdrawals, small amounts siphoned from parish donations over the years. Vincent didn't stop there. He produced an email chain. He did exchanges between the deacon and Charles in the weeks before the murders. Charles had cut off side earnings the deacon claimed were his due, insisting every penny go to the church and its people. The last message from the deacon was just 5 words: "You will regret this, Father." Whispers spread through the community. Parishioners remembered the tension between the two men. They recalled the way the deacon stopped showing up to morning mass after Charles took over. Some spoke of seeing the deacon pacing the church grounds late at night, muttering under his breath. But the most unsettling discovery came when detectives searched a locked cabinet in the deacon's office. Inside was a worn leather notebook, pages of names, dates, and cryptic notes, some crossed out, others marked with a small red X. And on the final page, a fresh entry, the name of the newly found victim. Before they could question him further, the deacon's lawyer stormed in, shutting it all down. Vincent's frustration boiled over as the deacon walked free for now, a faint smirk on his face. That night, as Vincent reviewed the notebook alone, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. One message, 5 chilling words. "You're next, just like him." Vincent stared at the glowing screen, the message still burning in his mind. "You're next, just like him." The room felt smaller, the ticking of the wall clock louder. He glanced at the darkened window, half expecting to see someone standing there, grabbing his coat. He headed straight for precinct, the notebook clutched tightly under his arm. Detectives were already digging into the deacon's past, but nothing could prepare them for the connections they began to uncover. Former parish staff who left suddenly, missing donations from years prior, and 3 unsolved deaths, all within a few blocks of the church. Each one eerily similar to the recent murder, and each one occurring when the deacon had disputes with members of the parish. Meanwhile, Charles sat in his small apartment, blinds drawn, every creak in the floorboards making him jump. Vincent dropped by to warn him about the threat, but Charles was trembling for another reason. "I saw him," he whispered. "Last night, outside my building." He didn't move. He just stood there. Vincent tightened his jaw. The deacon was careful, too careful, but the arrogance in his eyes the last time they spoke told Vincent something. He was daring them to come after him. Vincent decided to push harder, visiting old parishioners one by one, piecing together a timeline of when money disappeared, when tensions rose, and when strange accidents happened in the neighborhood. One elderly woman, her hands shaking as she poured tea, remembered the day Charles took over. The deacon's words still haunted her. "The church will be mine again, no matter what it takes." The deeper Vincent dug, the clearer it became. The deacon wasn't just lashing out at Charles. He'd been running something beneath the church's surface for years, something he was willing to protect at any cost. Late that night, Vincent returned home. His apartment door was ajar. Inside, nothing seemed stolen. Everything was in its place, except for one thing. The leather notebook, which he'd locked in his desk drawer, was now lying open on his bed. A new entry had been scrawled across the final page. "The next body will be found in the river, and you'll be the one to pull it out." The call came at 4:17 a.m. Vincent was already awake, the cryptic threat replaying in his head. The voice on the other end was urgent. Another body had been found, down by the East River. Vincent drove fast, the city still half asleep, fog curling low over the streets like it was hiding something. Yellow tape snapped in the wind as officers clustered near the water's edge. The air was heavy with the smell of the river and something else, something metallic. The corpse, bloated and pale, lay half on the bank, half in the icy water. A rosary was tangled in the victim's stiff fingers. Vincent crouched, squinting at the beads. It wasn't just any rosary. It had the same intricate silver cross as the one the church used during Sunday services. Detectives moved quickly, bagging evidence, snapping photos. But when the victim's ID was found, the tension shifted. It was Thomas Lane, a known troublemaker in the neighborhood, and someone who had publicly threatened Charles months earlier. Vincent's mind raced. Was this the deacon's work again? Or had Charles finally snapped? Hours later, the deacon was seen calmly walking into the church, greeting parishioners as though nothing had happened. When approached by police, he smiled faintly and said, "I told you, this place has always been cursed." That same afternoon, Vincent's phone buzzed, an anonymous tip. A grainy photo arrived, showing Thomas Lane alive 2 days after he was last seen. And in the background, unmistakable in the dim light, was Charles, standing beside him. Vincent's stomach sank. If the photo was real, then Charles had been with the victim just before his death. But before Vincent could process it, another message came through. A single sentence that made his blood run cold. Check the confessional booth. Vincent pushed open the heavy church doors. The air inside was cool, still almost oppressive. His footsteps echoed against the stone floor as he moved toward the confessional booth. The scent of incense lingered, faint but sharp, mingling with something else. Something foul, something fresh. He reached for the curtain, heart pounding. That's when he heard it. A muffled thump, then a whisper. Vincent yanked the curtain aside. Inside, crouched low, was a deacon. His hands were slick with blood, his eyes wide like a cornered animal. On the bench beside him lay a young woman, barely breathing, her wrist bound, her face pale. The deacon froze, caught mid-act. Officers swarmed in from the side aisles, weapons drawn, shouts filling the chamber. The deacon didn't resist. He only smiled a slow, twisted grin and muttered, "You don't know the half of it." Current status. The deacon is now behind bars, facing multiple charges, including attempted murder and suspected involvement in at least 4 other deaths linked to the parish. Charles, the priest, was cleared of all accusations and reinstated, but his reputation remained scarred. The church itself has lost much of its congregation, with many believing the building is cursed. They say the confessional booth is where sins are unburdened. But in this church, it became the place where sins were born, and maybe where they still linger. Quick question, what do you think? Was the deacon working alone, or is there still someone else hiding behind the altar's shadow? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more videos.